She was barely 17 when her cold, aristocratic husband carried his mistress over their threshold, expecting his young bride to quietly endure the ultimate humiliation. But the greatest scandal of the season wasn't his brazen infidelity. It was the moment the ruthless Duke of Ashbourne stepped forward and declared, "She's mine." The stained glass windows of St. Jude's Cathedral cast fractured, kaleidoscopic light across the stone floor. But Isolde Belmont felt only the biting chill of the draft. At 17, she was a striking girl, possessing a quiet, resilient beauty characterized by wide, observant hazel eyes and a cascade of dark auburn hair that had been ruthlessly pinned into a severe bridal style. She stood at the altar trembling, enveloped in a heavy gown of ivory silk that felt more like a burial shroud than a celebration of new life. Beside her stood Lord Desmond Rothschild, Viscount of Somerset. He was 32, immensely wealthy, and entirely indifferent to the teenager trembling beside him. Desmond was a man carved from marble-sharp jaw, patrician nose, and eyes, the color of a winter sky. He had not looked at Isolde once since she had walked down the aisle. He merely stared straight ahead, reciting his vows with the bored cadence of a man finalizing a tedious business transaction. And a transaction it was. The Belmont family, once proud and influential, had fallen into catastrophic debt. Isolde's father had made terrible investments in foreign shipping routes that had literally sunk to the bottom of the ocean. Desmond Rothschild had purchased the Belmont debts for a fraction of their worth, and in exchange for wiping the slate clean, he demanded the untouched, aristocratic Belmont bloodline to legitimize his newly acquired, ruthless fortune. Isolde was the price. When the bishop finally pronounced them man and wife, Desmond did not kiss her. He merely offered a stiff arm, escorted her out to the waiting carriage, and spoke his first words to her. "Do not expect poetry, Isolde," Desmond said, his voice a low, gravelly monotone as the carriage lurched forward toward his country estate, Ironhall. "You have your title. Your family has their salvation. That is where my obligations to you begin and end." Isolde swallowed the hard lump of fear in her throat, keeping her gaze fixed on her tightly clasped hands. "I expect nothing, my lord." "Excellent. We shall get along perfectly." Upon arriving at Ironhall, a sprawling, imposing fortress of dark stone set against the moors, Isolde's isolation truly began. Desmond deposited her with Mrs. Dawson, the severe housekeeper, and immediately rode out, claiming urgent estate matters. For a week, Isolde wandered the cavernous halls alone, trying to acclimate to her new reality as the Viscountess of Somerset. She took her meals in agonizing silence at a dining table built for 20. She was a ghost in her own home. Then came the afternoon of the storm. Heavy rain lashed against the tall windows of the manor. Isolde was in the drawing room, attempting to warm her hands by a meager fire when the sound of carriage wheels crunching aggressively on the gravel drive broke the monotony. Her heart gave a sudden, hopeful flutter. Perhaps Desmond had returned. Perhaps they could start over, find some amicable ground, and build a tolerable life. She hurried to the grand foyer, just as the massive oak doors swung open. Desmond strode in, shaking the rain from his heavy wool greatcoat. But he was not alone. Clinging to his arm, laughing brightly as if she owned the very air in the room, was a woman. She was older than Isolde, perhaps in her late 20s, radiating an unapologetic, sensual glamour. Her golden hair was perfectly coiffed despite the weather, and her traveling gown was tailored from expensive crimson velvet. Isolde froze at the base of the grand staircase. Desmond noticed his young wife and stopped. His expression did not soften. It hardened into a mask of absolute authority. He unlinked his arm from the woman's and stepped forward. "Isolde," Desmond said smoothly, the echoes of his voice bouncing off the high ceiling. "Allow me to introduce Miss Camilla Frost." Camilla offered a smile that did not reach her eyes. It was a predatory look. "The little bride," Camilla purred, her gaze raking over Isolde's plain day dress. "Desmond told me you were young, but, heavens, you look like you ought to be in the nursery." Isolde felt the blood drain from her face. "My lord," she whispered. looking to her husband for clarification. "Who is this?" "Camilla is my companion," Desmond stated, unblinking. "She has been a fixture in my life for 5 years. She will be taking the master suite in the East Wing." The master suite. The rooms traditionally shared by the lord and lady of the manor. Isolde had been relegated to a small, drafty guest room in the West Wing since her arrival. "She is staying here?" Isolde asked, her voice trembling despite her desperate attempt to keep it steady. The servants had gathered in the shadows of the hallways, watching the humiliation of their new mistress unfold in real time. "She is living here," Desmond corrected sharply. He stepped closer to Isolde, looming over her, using his height to intimidate the 17-year-old. "Let us be incredibly clear, Isolde. You are my wife. On paper. You will host when required. You will smile for the ton. And eventually, you will provide me with an heir. But Camilla holds my affection. You will not disrespect her. You will not question her presence. She will have whatever she desires in this house. Do I make myself clear?" Tears pricked Isolde's eyes, burning hot with shame and betrayal. She had braced herself for a loveless marriage, but she had not braced herself to be replaced in her own home before her marriage had even truly begun. She looked at Camilla, who was now instructing the footman on how to handle her mountain of luggage, completely ignoring the weeping teenager. "Yes, my lord," Isolde whispered, bowing her head. "Good," Desmond snapped. He turned his back on her, offering his arm to Camilla once more. "Come, my dear, let me show you your rooms. Mrs. Dawson will bring up the finest tea." Isolde stood alone in the freezing foyer. The heavy doors of Ironhall closed against the storm, trapping her inside a nightmare from which there seemed no escape. 6 months dragged by in an agonizing display of domestic cruelty. Isolde learned quickly that resisting Camilla was a futile endeavor. Camilla controlled the household budget, dictated the menus, and took whatever she pleased. When Isolde received a modest allowance from Desmond to purchase winter fabrics, Camilla intercepted the funds and bought herself a diamond necklace instead. Desmond simply turned a blind eye, treating Isolde as a nuisance whenever she dared to speak. But, as spring arrived, the societal rules of London demanded their presence. The London season was beginning, and Desmond's wealth required him to show his face and his new bride to the aristocratic elite. The most coveted invitation of the year arrived wrapped in black ribbon, bearing the heavy silver wax seal of the Duke of Ashbourne. Samon Lockwood, the Duke of Ashbourne, was a man spoken of in hushed, fearful tones. He was fiercely private, obscenely wealthy, and carried a reputation forged on the battlefields of the continent. He rarely hosted, making this ball the undisputed crown jewel of the season. On the evening of the ball, the townhouse in Mayfair was a battleground. Isolde had spent weeks hand-embroidering a beautiful sapphire blue silk gown for the occasion. It was her one source of pride. But an hour before the carriage was to depart, Camilla strolled into Isolde's room, flanked by 2 maids, and demanded the dress. "Desmond insists I wear it," Camilla lied smoothly, though her smug smile gave her away. "Blue is much more my color, don't you think? You can wear that white muslin thing. It suits your innocence." Isolde fought back the urge to scream. She sought out Desmond in his study, begging him to intervene. Desmond merely sipped his brandy and sighed in annoyance. "Give her the dress, Isolde. I will not have Camilla upset before we leave. Wear whatever you have. No one will be looking at you anyway." And so, Isolde arrived at the grandest ball of the decade, wearing an outdated, unadorned white muslin dress that made her look like a neglected governess rather than a viscountess. The Duke of Ashbourne's estate was breathtaking. Thousands of beeswax candles illuminated the cavernous ballroom, reflecting off gold-leafed ceilings and dripping crystal chandeliers. The crème de la crème of high society was present, dripping in jewels and wrapped in the finest silks. Desmond did not even pretend to play the dutiful husband. The moment they stepped past the receiving line, he abandoned Isolde by a towering marble pillar and swept Camilla onto the dance floor. The whispers began almost immediately. "Look at her. Lady Margaret murmured behind a feathered fan to Lord Percival. The Belmont girl, wearing rags while the mistress wears her family's dowry. Despicable, Lord Percival chuckled darkly. But what can a 17-year-old child do? She is entirely at Rothschild's mercy. Isolde heard every word. Her cheeks burned with a humiliating fire. She pressed herself tighter against the cold marble pillar, desperately wishing the floor would open up and swallow her whole. She closed her eyes, fighting a losing battle against the tears threatening to spill over her lashes. Are you attempting to merge with the architecture, Lady Somerset, or simply hiding from the vultures? The voice was a deep, resonant baritone that sent an unexpected shiver down Isolde's spine. She opened her eyes and gasped. Standing before her was Salmon Lockwood, the Duke of Ashbourne himself. He was taller than Desmond, broader, radiating an aura of dangerous, quiet power. He wore immaculate black evening wear, stark and unadorned, except for a single silver star pinned to his lapel. His dark hair was swept back, revealing striking, intelligent gray eyes that were currently locked onto hers with unsettling intensity. "Your Grace," Isolde stammered, immediately dropping into a deep, trembling curtsy. "I apologize. I was just catching my breath." Salmon did not look away. He stepped closer, effectively shielding her from the prying eyes of the room. He glanced out over the dance floor, his gaze landing directly on Desmond and Camilla, who were laughing together in a waltz. "I have commanded men in war, Lady Somerset," Salmon said quietly, his tone laced with a dangerous edge. "I know a strategic retreat when I see one, and I know a man acting like a coward when I see one." Isolde's breath hitched. "Please, Your Grace, you mustn't speak of my husband, so—" "Why?" Salmon asked, looking back down at her. He studied her face, taking in the cheap muslin dress, the lack of jewelry, and the profound, aching sadness in her young hazel eyes. "Because society dictates you must protect the honor of a man who clearly has none? You are 17 years old, thrown to the wolves, and yet you stand here holding your ground in a dress meant for a Sunday picnic. I find that far more compelling than any diamond in this room." Isolde didn't know how to respond to such blatant, shocking candor. Before she could find her voice, the music shifted into a slower, more deliberate waltz. Salmon held out a large, gloved hand. "Dance with me." It was not a request. "Your Grace, I cannot," Isolde whispered, panicking. "People will talk." "They are already talking," Samon replied, his jaw tightening. "Let us give them something vastly more interesting to say." Without waiting for her permission, he gently but firmly took her hand, pulling her from the shadows and leading her directly into the center of the ballroom. A hush fell over the crowd. The music seemed to falter for a fraction of a second before the orchestra caught up with the sudden shift in the room's energy. The notoriously reclusive Duke of Ashbourne, who had rejected dances from the daughters of earls and marquesses all evening, was dancing with the humiliated, plainly dressed teenage bride of Viscount Somerset. As Samon pulled her into his arms, his hand resting warmly on her waist, Isolde felt a strange, terrifying sense of safety. He moved with predatory grace, guiding her effortlessly. Across the room, Desmond finally noticed. He stopped dead in the middle of the floor, dropping Camilla's hands, his face flushing dark with sudden, violent fury. He recognized the profound insult. The Duke was making a public statement. As the music ended, Desmond stalked across the floor, his eyes blazing. He bypassed the social pleasantries entirely. "Ashbourne," Desmond spat, grabbing Isolde's arm roughly and yanking her away from the Duke. Isolde winced in pain. "My wife is tired. We are leaving." Salmon Lockwood did not move. He looked down at Desmond's hand, gripping Isolde's wrist, and the temperature in the room seemed to plummet to freezing. "Take your hand off her, Rothschild," Samon commanded, his voice lethal and low. Desmond scoffed, tightening his grip, fueled by public embarrassment. "She is my wife. She belongs to me. I will do as I please." In a blur of motion, Salmon stepped forward. His large hand clamped down over Desmond's wrist with bone-crushing force. Desmond gasped, his fingers involuntarily flying open, releasing Isolde. Simon smoothly pulled the trembling 17-year-old behind his broad back, shielding her completely from her husband. The entire ballroom was dead silent. Hundreds of eyes watched in breathless shock. Desmond cradled his wrist, his face pale with shock and rage. "You overstep, Your Grace! By what right do you interfere in my marriage?" "She is mine." Salmon Lockwood stared down at the Viscount, his grey eyes burning with a promise of absolute destruction. The Duke's voice rang out, clear and steady, echoing against the vaulted ceilings for every member of the aristocratic elite to hear. "Not anymore," the Duke declared. "She's mine." The silence in the Duke of Ashbourne's ballroom was absolute, heavy, with the collective suspended breath of London's most powerful aristocrats. Lord Frederick dropped his crystal champagne flute. The shattering glass echoed like a gunshot, yet no one dared look away from the tableau unfolding in the center of the room. Desmond Rothschild, the Viscount of Somerset, stood clutching his bruised wrist, his face shifting from shock to a mottled apoplectic red. "Have you lost your mind, Lockwood?" he hissed, his voice vibrating with venom. "You cannot simply declare a woman yours. We are bound by law, by the church. I will have you arrested for kidnapping. I will see you hanged, Duke or not." Salmon Lockwood did not flinch. He stood like a stone fortress in front of the trembling 17-year-old girl. "Call the guards, Rothschild. Please do. Let us have a public, legal inquiry into your affairs." The Duke's voice carried effortlessly over the silent crowd. He reached into the inner pocket of his immaculate black coat and withdrew a folded, wax-sealed parchment. He tossed it onto the polished floor at Desmond's feet. "What is this?" Desmond sneered, though his eyes darted nervously to the document. "A formal declaration of ruin," Samon replied smoothly. "While you were busy squandering your new fortune on mistresses and humiliating your child bride, my solicitors were busy untangling the web of the Belmont family debts. You did not merely purchase those debts, Viscount. You fabricated them." A collective gasp swept through the onlookers. Camilla Frost, standing a few paces behind Desmond, suddenly went very pale. "Lies," Desmond spat, though sweat now beaded on his forehead. "I have sworn testimonies from the harbor masters in Bristol," Samon continued, his grey eyes merciless. "Isolde's father's ships did not sink in a storm. They were intercepted, their manifests altered, and the cargo sold through a proxy company you secretly control. You bankrupted the Belmonts intentionally to steal their bloodline and their assets." Isolde gasped, grabbing the back of Simon's coat for support. Her father had died of a broken heart, believing he had ruined his family. To learn it was a malicious, orchestrated attack by the man who then claimed her as a prize sent a wave of nausea crashing over her. "You have no proof!" Desmond roared, lunging forward. Before he could take a second step, two of Salmon's personal guards, men built like mountains, wearing the Duke's silver crest, stepped from the shadows, blocking the Viscount's path. "I have the ships, I have the captains, and I own the primary holding bank that finances your entire estate," Salmon stated, his voice dropping to a lethal, quiet register. "If you ever approach this girl again, if you ever speak her name, I will not just call in your debts. I will take this evidence to the Crown, and you will spend the rest of your miserable life rotting in Newgate Prison, while your mistress begs for coppers in the streets." Samon turned away from the trembling Viscount, his dismissal absolute. He looked down at Isolde, the harshness in his eyes melting into something profoundly protective. "Come with me, Isolde," he said softly, offering his arm. Tears of vindication and sheer, overwhelming shock spilled down her cheeks. For the first time in 6 months, she did not look at Desmond for permission. She placed her small, trembling hand on the Duke's arm. Together, they walked through the parted sea of London's elite. No one dared speak. No one dared block their path. As they exited the grand townhouse and stepped into the cool night air, Samon's waiting carriage, a sleek, black phantom, drawn by 4 massive midnight black stallions, stood ready. He helped her inside, climbing in after her and signaling the driver. As the carriage lurched forward, Leaving the scandal of the century behind them, Isolde collapsed against the plush velvet squabs, her entire body shaking violently. Samon poured a glass of amber liquid from a crystal decanter, mounted on the carriage wall, and pressed it into her hands. "Drink, it is brandy. It will stop the shivering." She took a choked sip, coughing as the liquid burned down her throat. She looked at the powerful, enigmatic man sitting across from her in the dim light of the carriage lamps. "Why?" she whispered, her voice broken. "Why would you do this for me? You do not know me." Salmon leaned back, the shadows obscuring the complex emotion in his eyes. "I knew your father, Rodolphe. He saved my life on the continent, long before he became a shipping merchant. I made him a promise that, if he ever needed me, I would answer. I returned from abroad to find him dead, his fortune stolen, and his only daughter sold to a monster." Isolde stared at him, the pieces falling into place. "You orchestrated all of this? The ball? The confrontation?" "I needed him to bring you to me," Salmon admitted, his jaw tightening. "I needed to break him in public, to ensure society knew he was finished, so they would never dare blame you for leaving. You are safe now, little bird. The war is over." But as the carriage sped toward the Duke's fortress-like estate, Isolde couldn't shake the terrifying feeling that the war had only just begun. Wolf's Gate was not merely a manor. It was an impenetrable citadel of dark stone and ancient secrets, perched on a cliff, overlooking a tempestuous gray sea. When Isolde awoke the next morning, she did not find herself in a freezing, drafty guest room. She was enveloped in an ocean of down pillows, beneath a canopy of heavy, forest green velvet. A fire roared merrily in the hearth, chasing away the damp chill of the coastal morning. A gentle knock sounded, and a kindly, older woman with a ring of keys at her belt entered. "Good morning, my lady. I am Mrs. Gable, the Duke's housekeeper. His Grace requested you be allowed to sleep as long as you required." For the next week, Isolde lived in a state of surreal disbelief. She was treated not as an unwanted burden, but as the revered lady of the house. Beautiful, tailored gowns in rich emeralds, deep sapphires, and warm golds appeared in her wardrobe. The servants bowed their heads respectfully. Most surprisingly, Salmon did not smother her. He gave her space to heal, to breathe, to simply exist without fear. They met only for dinner in the grand dining hall. Unlike the agonizing silence of Ironhall, dinners at Wolf's Gate were filled with conversation. Salmon asked her about her thoughts, her interests, and the books she had read in his massive library. He treated her like an intellectual equal, listening to her with an intense, unwavering focus that made her cheeks flush. Slowly, the terrified, beaten-down 17-year-old began to fade, replaced by a young woman discovering her own voice. She learned that behind the Duke's fearsome reputation was a man fiercely loyal to his people, a man who carried the heavy burdens of his past with stoic grace. However, back in London, the wounded beasts were cornered and desperate. Desmond Rothschild's world was crumbling. The Duke had kept his word. Banks were freezing Desmond's assets, and society had entirely ostracized him, following the public humiliation. Creditors were beginning to circle Ironhall like vultures. In his dimly lit study, Desmond threw a crystal goblet against the wall, shattering it into 100 pieces. "He has ruined me!" he screamed, overturning his heavy mahogany desk. "Ashbourne has ruined everything." Camilla Frost sat calmly on a velvet settee, sipping her tea, her eyes cold and calculating, screaming like a petulant child. "Will not fix this, Desmond. You are losing your nerve." "He has proof, Camilla. He has the harbor master's testimonies." "Testimonies can be retracted," Camilla said smoothly, setting her teacup down. "Men can be bought, or they can be silenced." Desmond stopped, staring at her, a dark, desperate glimmer entering his eyes. "What are you suggesting?" "I am suggesting that as long as the little bride is under Ashbourne's protection, playing the victim, society will side with the Duke." "But," Camilla smiled, a venomous, sharp expression, "if Isolde were to suffer a tragic accident, or if she were found to be involved in the very fraud you are accused of, The Duke's protection would mean nothing. He would look like a fool harboring a criminal. Desmond paced the floor. She is at Wolfsgate. It is a fortress. We cannot touch her there. We do not need to breach the fortress, Camilla purred, standing up and smoothing her skirts. We simply need to draw her out. We need a weakness. She has no one. Her family is dead. Not everyone, Camilla corrected, pulling a folded letter from her bodice. I intercepted this before we left Ironhall. It seems your dear wife has a younger cousin, a boy. He is away at boarding school in York. Desmond's eyes widened as he grasped the leverage they had just uncovered. If we have the boy. Exactly, Camilla whispered, stepping close to him. We send a message, a desperate plea for help. She will leave the safety of Wolfsgate to save her blood, and when she is on the open road, unprotected. A week later, at Wolfsgate, Isolde was in the library, laughing as Salmon recounted a dryly humorous story about a stubborn horse he had once owned. The tension between them had grown palpable, a magnetic pull that was terrifying in its intensity. He looked at her not with the cold indifference of her husband, but with a burning, protective heat that made her heart race. Their laughter was interrupted by a footman who bowed deeply. Forgive the intrusion, Your Grace. A courier just arrived. He carried an urgent letter for Lady Somerset. Isolde's brow furrowed. She took the sealed letter, breaking the wax. As she read the hasty, panicked scrawl, the blood drained entirely from her face. Isolde, please help me. Men came to the school. They took me. They say I am to be put in a workhouse for your father's debts. I am so frightened. Please, meet them at the Black Boar Inn on the Eastern Road tonight, or I do not know what they will do to me. Oliver, the letter slipped from her fingers, fluttering to the carpet. Salmon was beside her in an instant, his large hands gripping her shoulders. Isolde? What is it? She looked up at him, absolute terror returning to her hazel eyes. The war wasn't over. Desmond was striking back, and he was using the last piece of her family to destroy her. Samon Lockwood retrieved the crumpled letter from the carpet, his eyes scanning the panicked handwriting of Isolde's younger cousin. As he read, the warm, engaging man, who had just been laughing with her, vanished. In his place stood the ruthless military tactician who had commanded battalions across Europe, his jaw locked and his gray eyes turned to ice. I must go, Isolde breathed, her hands shaking so violently she had to clasp them together. Salmon. They will send him to a workhouse, or worse. He is only 10 years old. I have to surrender myself. You will do no such thing, Samon said, his voice a low, immovable command. He stepped forward, taking her trembling hands in his large, warm grip. Isolde, look at me. This is a trap. Desmond is a cornered rat, and this is his desperate attempt to drag you back into his sinking ship. If you walk into that inn alone, you will never see Wolfsgate or your cousin again. But Oliver will be safe, Samon interrupted gently, though his eyes burned with fierce determination. I promised your father I would protect his bloodline. That extends to the boy. We will go to the Black Boar Inn, Isolde. But we will not be playing Viscount Somerset's game. We will be playing mine. Within the hour, a carriage bearing no royal crest thundered down the treacherous, rain-slicked eastern road. Inside, Isolde sat beside Samon, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Outside, hidden by the encroaching darkness and the torrential downpour, 24 of the Duke's most elite guards rode in perfect, lethal silence, commanded by Captain Bennet. The Black Boar Inn was a dilapidated structure sagging against the edge of a desolate moor. Its windows glowed with a sickly yellow light, and the stench of cheap ale and wet rot hung heavy in the air. You must walk in first, Salmon instructed, his tone laced with regret. He touched her cheek, his thumb brushing a stray tear from her skin. Draw them out into the main taproom. Keep them talking. I will be exactly 1 step behind you. Isolde nodded, drawing a deep breath to steady her fraying nerves. She pushed open the heavy wooden door of the inn. The tap room was entirely empty of patrons. The innkeeper was nowhere to be seen. In the center of the room, seated at a scarred wooden table, was Camilla Frost. She wore a heavy, traveling cloak, her golden hair reflecting the dim firelight. Beside her stood Desmond, looking hollowed out, frantic, and dangerous. And tied to a chair in the corner, a gag securely fastened over his mouth, was little Oliver. The boy's eyes widened with sheer terror as he saw Isolde. "Oliver!" Isolde cried, taking a step forward. Desmond immediately drew a heavy flintlock pistol from his coat, pointing it directly at the child. "Ah, the devoted cousin arrives," Desmond sneered, his voice cracking with manic energy. "Stop right there, Isolde. Not another step." Isolde froze, her blood running cold. She forced herself to stand tall, channeling the quiet strength she had learned within the walls of Wolfsgate. "I am here, Desmond. Let the boy go. This is between us." "Between us?" Desmond laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You ruined me, you little witch. You and your duke. My accounts are frozen. My creditors are threatening to seize Ironhall. Society treats me as if I carry the plague." "You ruined yourself," Isolde replied smoothly, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "You stole my family's fortune and thought you could bury the evidence." Camilla stood up, pulling a folded legal document and a vial of ink from her cloak. "Enough posturing," the mistress snapped. She looked at Isolde with pure venom. "You are going to sign this confession, Isolde. It states that you and your late father orchestrated the shipping fraud, and that you seduced the Duke of Ashbourne into framing your husband to escape your debts. Sign it, and we leave the boy alive." "And if I refuse?" Isolde asked. Desmond cocked the pistol. The click echoed like a cannon shot in the quiet room. "Then the boy dies, and we tell the magistrate you perished in a tragic carriage accident on the moors." "A flawed plan, Viscount." A deep, resonant voice echoed from the shadows near the entrance, particularly because the magistrate is already here. Desmond and Camilla whirled around. Salmon Lockwood stepped into the dim light of the tap room. He did not carry a pistol, nor did he look remotely concerned. He radiated absolute, terrifying authority. Behind him stood a portly, pale man, the regional magistrate, flanked by Captain Bennett and a dozen heavily armed guards. Desmond's face drained of all color. He swung the pistol toward the Duke, his hand shaking violently. "Stay back. I will shoot." "You will not," Simon said calmly, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. "My men have already disarmed your hired thugs outside. You have no leverage, Rothschild. Only a kidnapping charge, extortion, and attempted murder to add to your already impressive list of financial crimes." Camilla, realizing the trap had entirely collapsed upon them, immediately backed away from Desmond. "I had nothing to do with this," she shrieked, pointing an accusatory finger at her lover. "He forced me. He planned the whole thing. I am merely his companion. I hold no legal power." "Shut up, you treacherous viper!" Desmond roared, swinging the gun toward Camilla. In that split second of distraction, Samon lunged. He crossed the room with the speed of a striking predator, violently twisting the pistol from Desmond's grip and driving his fist into the Viscount's jaw. Desmond crumpled to the floor, instantly unconscious. Isolde rushed past the chaos, falling to her knees beside Oliver. She tore the gag from his mouth and rapidly untied the heavy ropes, binding his wrists, pulling the sobbing child into a fierce embrace. "I have you," she whispered, crying into his hair. "You are safe. I have you." Salmon stood over Desmond's prone form as Captain Bennett hauled the unconscious Viscount to his feet, slapping iron cuffs around his wrists. The magistrate stepped forward, shaking his head. "Take them both away. The Crown will see them hanged or sent to the penal colonies for this." As the guards dragged a screaming, pleading Camilla and a broken Desmond out into the storm, the suffocating darkness of the Black Boar Inn finally lifted. Samon knelt beside Isolde and Oliver. His gray eyes, so terrifying moments before, softened into deep pools of warmth. He gently placed a hand on Oliver's shoulder. You are a brave young man, Oliver. Tomorrow we will get you fitted for a proper school uniform. You will lack for nothing, I promise you. Isolde looked at Simon, her heart overflowing with an emotion so profound it stole her breath. A month later, the scandal that had rocked London finally settled into history. Viscount Somerset was stripped of his titles and exiled to an overseas penal colony for his crimes against the crown and his financial fraud. Camilla Frost, stripped of her stolen finery, was sentenced to a debtor's workhouse. Because the marriage had never been consummated, and due to the undeniable proof of Desmond's fraudulent coercion, the Archbishop granted an immediate annulment. Isolde was no longer Viscountess Somerset. She was simply Isolde Belmont, once more free, vindicated, and healing. She stood on the grand balcony of Wolfsgate, watching the sun break through the clouds over the turbulent sea. A warm, heavy cloak was draped over her shoulders. Simon stepped out onto the balcony, wrapping his arms around her from behind and pulling her back against his broad chest. He pressed a gentle kiss to the crown of her head. A penny for your thoughts, he murmured, his deep voice vibrating against her back. I was just thinking, Isolde smiled, leaning into his strength, that my father would have liked you very much. Simon turned her in his arms, looking down at her with a raw, unprotected vulnerability that he reserved only for her. I do not care about the title, Isolde. I do not care about the grand estates or the society that watches us. I only care about you. Will you do me the profound honor of becoming my wife? Not a prisoner, not a transaction, but my equal, my duchess, my duchess. Isolde reached up, tracing the strong line of his jaw. The 17-year-old girl, who had trembled at the altar of St. Jude's Cathedral, was gone. In her place stood a resilient, deeply loved woman. Yes, Isolde whispered, tears of pure joy shining in her hazel eyes. I am yours. Simon smiled, pulling her into a breathtaking, passionate kiss that promised a lifetime of safety, respect, and unbroken vows. Will Isolde and the Duke finally find their happily ever after? Or will the ghosts of high society continue to haunt their new life together? If you are captivated by this tale of betrayal, high society drama, and forbidden romance, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video. Ring the bell so you won't miss out on our next historical romance drama.